Cancel it. Every cent, every deal. The words fell from her lips like thunder in a ballroom that moments before had roared with laughter. Glasses froze midair, smiles vanished, and the groom's family turned pale as the reality struck. She wasn't just a bride. She was the force holding their fortune together. In seconds, their mockery became their downfall. But this wasn't about money. It was about respect, about power, about dignity no one could strip away. This is the story of a bride underestimated until she shattered a $950 million empire. Comment your city below if you're watching. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, their golden light spilling across polished marble floors. Guests moved gracefully between tables dressed in ivory linen, laughter rising above the string quartet's soft performance. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like a perfect wedding, two powerful families uniting in a grand celebration. But beneath the elegance, another story simmered quietly, one that few dared to acknowledge. At the heart of the evening was Amara, the bride. She stood tall in her gown, a masterpiece of silk and lace, the kind of dress that commanded admiration. To her friends and colleagues, she was a woman of brilliance and influence, someone who had carved her own path through determination and vision. But here, surrounded by the groom's family, she felt the weight of eyes that saw only her skin, not her worth. Her smile was poised, her movements graceful, but she could hear the whispers. Subtle, sharp comments that floated like daggers cloaked in laughter. A glance at her hair, a remark about her background, a joke too cruel to be mistaken for lightheartedness. Each word echoed louder in her mind than the music that filled the room. What the groom's family didn't know was that Amara was more than a bride in white. Beyond the polished surface, she carried power. Power she never flaunted. Power born not from the man she married, but from the empire she quietly built. To them, she was just a girl from the wrong side of the story, someone who had reached too far. Still, she stayed silent. She moved through the night as though untouched, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Let them laugh. Let them whisper. Because soon their arrogance would blind them to the storm already on its way. They saw only a bride. They did not know the woman who could bring empires to their knees. The evening stretched on, and with each passing hour, the mask of civility thinned. Amara moved gracefully across the ballroom, her gown sweeping the floor like liquid silk, but every step felt heavier under the burden of unspoken judgment. At the head table, the groom's family clustered together, their voices low but laced with venom. Their laughter never reached their eyes when they looked at her. It began with something small. A cousin leaned close to another, muttering words that were followed by muffled chuckles. Amara caught fragments, phrases about looking out of place, remarks about where she came from. She ignored them, letting her composure act as armor. But the whispers soon grew bolder, spreading like wildfire until the sting of mockery was impossible to ignore. Aunties glanced at her gown, whispering that it must have been borrowed. Uncles joked that her family name didn't carry weight in circles that mattered. Even the grandmother, wrapped in pearls and prestige, shook her head slowly, as if the sight of Amara confirmed her worst fears about the union. The cruelty wasn't shouted. It was sharpened in silence, honed in smirks, and delivered through subtle gestures that screamed louder than insults. A wine glass, tipped ever so slightly toward her, a mocking toast that wasn't meant to honor but to ridicule. A waiter stumbled at her side, a snicker escaping from the groom's brother as though Amara herself had orchestrated the mishap, and all the while, the groom said nothing. His silence was more deafening than the whispers. To the family, his stillness meant consent. To Amara, it meant betrayal. She maintained her poise, the picture of calm elegance, but deep within, a storm was gathering. Because Amara was not the helpless bride they imagined her to be. She was the CEO of a conglomerate that spanned continents, a woman who held influence in industries their family desperately depended upon. But here, tonight, none of that seemed to matter. They didn't see the empire she built. They saw only the color of her skin. The laughter swelled during the speeches. A cousin raised a glass, smiling as he praised the groom's bravery in choosing a partner so different. The words were framed as humor, but the undertone was poisonous. The room erupted in laughter, and Amara felt heat rise in her chest, though her face betrayed nothing. Her silence, however, was not weakness. It was a calculation. Every slight, every insult, every careless word, they were not forgotten. She stored them carefully, the way a warrior sharpens her blade in the quiet before battle. The family thought they had reduced her to an ornament at their table, a guest in her own celebration. They had no idea that each laugh was laying the foundation for their own downfall. Then came the final cut, the moment that pierced deeper than the rest. The groom's father stood, his voice commanding, his tone dripping with false warmth. He thanked everyone for being part of this historic union, but his following words sliced through the air. "We welcome Amara into the family, though we all know this match isn't exactly equal." The ballroom fell silent for half a breath, then burst into uneasy applause. Amara's smile never faltered, but inside, the storm broke open. What they didn't realize was that the future of their wealth, their prestige, their standing in the business world, all of it rested in contracts signed by the very woman they mocked. And with one decision, one stroke of her pen, she could unravel everything they thought untouchable. The laughter ringing in her ears would soon give way to silence. The applause dwindled into whispers, but Amara stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the father who had just diminished her in front of hundreds. The music resumed faintly, but the energy in the ballroom had shifted. She could feel it, an expectation that she would shrink, bow her head, and accept their version of welcome. Instead, she rose from her chair with calm precision. Every eye followed her as she walked toward the center of the room. The soft click of her heels echoed against marble, louder than the music, sharper than the applause. She lifted her glass, her smile perfectly intact, and for a fleeting second, the family relaxed, thinking she would toast them, perhaps even thank them. But Amara did not raise her glass in gratitude. She raised it in farewell. With a steady voice, she announced that the $950 million deal, one that her company had been finalizing with the groom's family business, was no longer on the table. Gasps rippled through the room, a wave of shock crashing against the gilded walls. The grandmother clutched her pearls, the uncles froze mid-sip, and the groom's face drained of color. Amara's words were not shouted, but every syllable cut sharper than a blade. She made it clear. Respect could not be bought, and power could not be mocked. The deal was over, and in that single moment, the laughter stopped. Silence swallowed the ballroom, broken only by the sound of empires crumbling. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. The ballroom that had once echoed with laughter now lay in silence. Faces that once smirked with superiority were frozen in disbelief. The bride they had mocked, dismissed, and belittled had just dismantled their empire with nothing more than her voice. Amara stood tall, her gown gleaming under the chandeliers, no longer just a bride, but the embodiment of quiet, unshakable power. The groom's family scrambled to process what had just unfolded. The father, who moments earlier had spoken with such arrogance, now sat pale and trembling, realizing the fortune he had taken for granted had slipped through his fingers. The uncles who whispered, the cousins who laughed, the grandmother who disapproved, all of them now watched in stunned silence as the woman they thought unworthy revealed the actual cost of their cruelty. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any triumphant speech could have been. She left the ballroom with her dignity intact, her head high and her heart steady. This was not just about money. It was about worth. It was about the simple truth that no wealth, no legacy, no family name could stand when built on disrespect and prejudice. Her choice was more than a canceled contract. It was a message, a warning, a mirror held up to a world where racism still cloaked itself in whispers and smiles. That night, she reminded everyone that true power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't demand to be seen. True power waits, and when the time is right, it speaks once and the world listens. So ask yourself, how many more stories like Amara's must unfold before dignity is valued above prejudice? Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more stories that matter.